It's 5 o'clock in the UK, 7 o'clock here in Jerusalem. You're watching our special program with me, Yalda Hakim, as Israel strikes back against Iran. They promised to retaliate, and action eventually came 5 days after Tehran launched its massive missile and drone attack. The target, the central province of Isfahan, home to nuclear facilities, but Iran has downplayed the effects of the airstrike. Much of the rest of the world, including G7 foreign ministers, call for calm and an end to the attacks.
We're committed to Israel's security. We're also committed to de-escalating, to trying to bring this tension to a close.
But with Israel and Iran now targeting each other directly for the first time, we'll look at the impact this week's events could have on this region and we report from Lebanon, where one of Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, continues to teeter on the brink of all-out war with Israel. Good evening from Jerusalem, where Israel has now carried out its promise to retaliate to the Iranian attacks of last weekend. The government and military here are declining to confirm or deny that they even carried out a strike. And with the Iranians downplaying the incident, it's hard to know exactly what damage was caused. But with Tehran saying it doesn't intend to retaliate immediately, it seems the Israeli action was perhaps not as intense as it could have been. Well, let's just take you through the events over the past 2.5 weeks, which built up to the overnight attack. Now, on the 1st of April, a suspected Israeli strike hit Iran's consulate in the Syrian capital of Damascus, killing at least 13 people, including 3 senior commanders in Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Last Saturday, Iran retaliated by launching a series of drones and missiles towards Israel. Residents in the Golan Heights and southern towns of Nevatim, Dimona and Eilat were told to take cover. Israel says around 300 missiles and drones were fired by Iran, but 99% were shot down, with most intercepted before entering Israeli airspace. Today, U.S. officials said Israel launched a retaliatory strike against Iran overnight. Flights were grounded in the capital city of Tehran, and Iranian state TV reported 3 drones were destroyed over the central city of Isfahan, close to a major military airbase and other nuclear facilities. Well, our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has tonight's first report.
After 5 days considering its next move, Israel launched an attack on Iran in the early hours of Friday morning. The target was an airbase near the central city of Isfahan. By first light, the skies were calm again. This was filmed at the nearby Isfahan nuclear facility. Not itself a target, but by hitting close by, Israel had made a point. By breakfast time, Iranian state media was reporting that a few small drones had been shot down.
Nothing has happened. Everything is back to normal.
The sound heard early in the morning today in Isfahan was not an explosion. It was our powerful air defense firing at a suspicious object.
Social media in Iran mocked Israel's attack, another indication that the government was starting to play it down. Iran's president gave an address on television later in the morning and only had this to say on recent tensions with Israel.
Striking Israel was necessary, obligatory, unifying, and a source of pride and power for our great country.
There has been no official comment from the Israeli government, although the far-right National Security Minister Ben Gvir put out this tweet describing the strikes as feeble. Israel's allies, who this week had been urging restraint, were noticeably coy today.
I'm not going to speak to that, except to say that the United States has not been involved in any offensive operations.
Calm heads should prevail. Any significant escalation in the region is not what anyone needs. It wouldn't be in anyone's interests.
There have been no reports of casualties from the Israeli attack, and Iran state TV hasn't shown any video of damage caused. Benjamin Netanyahu would have been given a menu of options for a response against Iran by the IDF. On the more provocative end of the scale would have been a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Lower down, an attack on pro-Iranian militia in Syria, for example. In one ear, he would have had the extreme right-wing elements of his coalition demanding that Israel take out a strong response. In the other ear, the US president and other Western allies telling him to take the win and walk away. In the end, he sided with neither and chose something in the middle, a limited response, which Iran appears to be brushing off. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who joins me here in Jerusalem. And Dom, what a week it's been. And for now, it feels like some sort of crisis has been averted.
It does for now, but I think the danger remains. We talk about the rules of the game in the Middle East being all important. The reason for that is it is a volatile region. It is utterly devoid of any trust. And so it's hugely important that each country knows or has a rough idea how the other country is going to behave, what it's going to do next, how it's going to react to what you do. And those rules have changed since October the 7th, when Hamas did something Israel did not expect. They changed again on April the 1st when Israel hit a target that Iran was not expecting to be hit. And then Iran then responded in a way that the Israelis didn't expect either. So in the wake of all that, the whole thing has kind of shifted. It's become much more dangerous. I think, as our report kind of explores, the crisis is averted for now. But there are lots of different issues still. The questions still remain, and it remains a very dangerous, unstable situation.
In protests in Tehran, they chanted "Down with Israel" and stuck to the official script in the wake of Israeli attacks.
The Israelis didn't do anything special based off what I heard from news agencies. I don't think they have the courage to do anything after Iran's successful strike.
There is relief across the region that Iran is responding by putting on protests, not retaliating again with missiles. The Middle East has stepped back from the brink after Iran's unprecedented missile onslaught on Israel at the weekend. But analysts here say the rules in the region have changed, and Iran has now forever upped the ante.
Now, every time that Israel might do something against the IRGC or might do some sabotage against their nuclear program, as we've seen countless times over the years, this could be the excuse that the Iranians want to launch another salvo of drones and ballistic missiles at Israel.
For almost half a century of assassinations, proxy wars, secret operations, Iran and Israel have fought each other in the shadows. After Israel's massive airstrike on Iranian commanders in Damascus earlier this month, the fear was of all-out conflict engulfing the region. That hasn't happened yet. But Israeli observers of Iran say something fundamental has now shifted all the same.
Yes, the shadow war came out of the shadows. It will return to the shadows, but this is not permanent. Now we have a precedent for Iran firing at Israel in such large numbers. I think they could do it again somewhere along the line, but I think they're going to choose a more convenient time.
Israel still faces the threat of attacks from Hezbollah from the north, missiles from militia in the east, and its war in Gaza has yet to neutralise Hamas. On any of those fronts, there is the risk of escalation to a much bigger war. That threat has been averted for now with Iran, but it remains an ever-present danger. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Jerusalem.
OK, let's speak now to General Joseph Votel, a former commander of the US Central Command. Thank you so much, General, for joining us here on the programme. I first would like to get your reaction to the events of the last few hours, where we woke up to learn that Israel had attacked Iran.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be with you. Well, like everyone has kind of indicated, I think we expected some type of response from Israel. They had a lot of options available to them. They could go very heavy against strategic targets, or they could do something like they chose to do, and they had some other options outside of the region. I think what Israel has had to do was consider a variety of different factors in making the decision. They clearly took the time to make a decision and then executed it, I think, as we would have expected them to do. So clearly the game has changed a little bit in the Middle East, but hopefully we are the current escalation cycle has diminished a little bit.
General, I just want you to also reflect on last weekend and years of work that CENTCOM has played such an important role in, bringing in Israel into CENTCOM in 2021, getting Israel and Arab nations to share data, bringing all of these different allies and groups together to be able to launch the kind of military operation that we saw last weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big idea here, of course, is that strong relationships, not just with the United States and its regional partners, but with Israel and Gulf partners, I think is perhaps the most powerful deterrent that we can establish against Iran. Last weekend's activities, with the support of the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Jordan, in support of Israel, is a good example, I think, for the rest of the region. And I'm hopeful that coming out of this, that our regional Gulf partners will look at that and recommit themselves to more collaboration among themselves, more collaboration with Israel, more collaboration with the United States, and more integration between all of themselves. I think that's absolutely vital, and that would be a good takeaway from this, and would help establish a level of deterrence that would hopefully preclude Iran from its more adventuresome activities across the region.
Do you think this now draws a line on these events, and we've sort of averted a major escalation and crisis?
Well, I think that's right. Yes, I don't think either country, Iran or Israel, was interested in a protracted conflict here. Certainly, the United States and much of the region was not interested in that. So I think they've seen what we've been to the brink here on this. They've seen how this looks. Clearly, some of the rules of the game have changed, but Israel, I think, is keen to get back and finish the work that they have started in Gaza and conclude that. Certainly, getting involved in a protracted fight with Iran didn't advance their objectives in Gaza further, and it actually probably would have worked against it.
Yeah, General, I also want to ask you about reports that the U.S. may restrict weapons transfers to certain Israeli units for human rights abuses. Just your reaction to that?
Well, I have not heard many details on that. I've not heard about us doing this with the Israelis before. We have done this with a number of other nations around the world. This is a longstanding U.S. law, so I really can't comment because I don't know anything on this particular allegation. But this is a policy of the United States, and one that our members of Congress take quite seriously, and that our military is obligated to follow.
I also want your reflections on Israel's operations in Gaza, and also the fact that we are hearing reports, and we have continued to hear reports, that the Israelis are planning on entering Rafah. Given it's such a densely populated area, do you think that's the right move now?
Well, certainly the humanitarian situation there has got to be the driving factor in any military operation into Rafah. So my hope here is that Israel will continue to be very deliberate about this, look for ways to minimize the impact on the civilians that are down in that particular area, work more closely with the humanitarian aid community, and investigate and look for different ways to get after Hamas that may not require large-scale invasions and occupation on the ground with lots of their forces. So again, I think they have to think through this very, very carefully. Ultimately, they have to make the decision on this, but clearly they've seen the impact that these operations around civilians have had on support for their operations in Gaza, and they have to take that into very, very strong consideration.
Okay, General Joseph Vattel, thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much. Well, let's bring in Dominic, my colleague, back here with us, as well as our colleague from NBC, Richard Engel, who joins me live on the programme as well. Thank you both for joining us. Richard, good to see you.
Good to see
you.
Just
hearing there from CENTCOM. I mean, CENTCOM played a huge role last weekend in those operations. They really, without the support of CENTCOM, Israel would have been in a great deal of trouble.
The U.S. didn't talk about it very much, but played an enormous role in this because it was a quickly, sort of hastily organized coalition that was put together. He mentioned the UK, France, Jordan. The U.S. was very much leading that coalition. So, of course, Israel used its air defenses. Israel has a great military, has great air defenses. But putting together that coalition to knock down most of these ballistic missiles, drones, cruise missiles, even before they entered Israeli airspace, there was a lot of American work that was being done behind the scenes.
Yeah, Dom, you know, we've been speaking to Israeli officials over the last few days, and certainly two former Israeli prime ministers said to me that Israel committed a couple of strategic blunders over the last 6 months. The first was the security failings of October the 7th. The second was that April 1 attack, which frankly, the Iranians say crossed a red line, a diplomatic compound was targeted, ended up killing one of their senior Quds Force commanders, and that's why we are where we are now.
Yeah, and as that security analyst Yaakov Katz put to me earlier, what they're very good at, the Israelis, is gathering intelligence. They know exactly what's happening in terms of SIM cards being changed over, what people are saying on the other side. But what they seem to have got rather bad at is interpreting that intelligence and trying to work out what might happen next. So they had information coming in. We now know a lot of chatter was going on ahead of October the 7th, but they did not anticipate what happened on that day. And equally, as you say, with the attack on the embassy compound at Damascus, where these high-level IRGC commanders were gathered, they thought that they could carry on with this sort of process of taking out commanders with relative impunity, as they have done throughout this conflict. They didn't anticipate this massive reaction they had from the Iranians in launching this huge missile onslaught that came on Saturday. And so they have to address that. But I think they will be consoled by the fact, the Americans, the British, that this air defense system they've been working on for years now actually worked. But I think a lot of Israelis are still very unsettled by the fact that they're kind of outsourcing in that their security to foreigners, and they're unhappy with that kind of reliance on outside forces.
Richard, what's extraordinary, I think, about this moment is that we've seen in the space of a week state-on-state attack. And today we stand here saying, well, crisis has been averted.
Yeah, I don't think it's been averted at all. You know, we're talking about a strike that happened not that long ago, an escalation of sorts, and how that strike is leading to a de-escalation. So, okay, maybe we've averted for now a direct war between Iran and Israel that neither side really wanted. They didn't want a direct fight right now. But we could be just weeks away from a Rafah operation. And then we'll be back in a very emotionally charged situation where they're going to be, if it goes ahead as anticipated, it'll be extraordinarily bloody. It'll be very provocative. It'll be seen around the world as a devastating turn of events. Israel says it's necessary because Hamas is hiding out among the civilians in Rafah. But a few weeks from now, if Rafah goes ahead, I think there's a very strong possibility we will be back here once again talking about the region on edge, talking about a potential new crisis with Iran. So, okay, we lived through the day. This particular war didn't happen this week, but watch Rafah, and it's still coming.
And just to Richard's point there, that we will find ourselves talking about Gaza again in the coming days or weeks. I mean, the situation in Gaza really isolated Israel internationally. What happened last weekend sort of almost made Israel the victim again.
Yeah, and it was a distraction, and now the eyes of the world back on Israel to see what it does in Rafah. As Richard says, you know, this region is always in a state of some sort of crisis. And the problem is, even if the crisis over the fear of a much bigger war erupting out of what happened on Saturday, if that has been put aside for now, as long as this war in Gaza goes on, it is still a mass casualty event away from a much bigger crisis. You know, a Houthi missile into a tourist hotel in Eilat, killing a lot of Israelis. an Israeli shell going into a kindergarten in South Lebanon. All of that could lead to a much wider escalation. So that's why allies are saying to Israel, well done for restraining and putting out into effect a more limited retaliation overnight. But the key thing is also they're pressing both the Israelis and Hamas to try and end this war in Gaza as soon as possible for the sake of the region and its stability.
In the meantime, the shadow wars continue. This we saw was overt, but it will go back to covert operations.
Covert operations, operations through proxies, this will continue. So what we avoided right now was probably a full-on military conflict with the United States, the UK, other countries fighting against Iran, which nobody really wanted. It would have been difficult for Israel to be fighting two wars at the same time, the one in Gaza and then another one against Iran, which would also probably lead to another one with the Houthis and another one with South Lebanon. But no, we're not out of this. And there is also another far more cynical and even conspiratorial way of looking at it. There are many Israelis, opponents of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who say he didn't miscalculate at all. He did the attack on the embassy compound in Damascus, knowing that the Iranians would respond, knowing that the Americans and others would have to come bail out Israel. It would divert attention from Gaza. And now, by showing a degree of restraint, and that's what people are sort of congratulating Israel on for today, for showing restraint, then it allows them to go ahead and push into Gaza. So was it a miscalculation, or was this part of the calculation?
Right, and all these reports as well, and more in the Arab press, that the kind of deal has been done between the Americans and the Israelis. The Israelis saying we want to go in much harder. We will limit our retaliation with Iran as long as you let us have more of a carte blanche dealing with Rafah. We don't know if that's true or not, but if it is true, then yet again events in the region are giving the Palestinians the hardest time. They are bearing the brunt of what else is happening across the Middle East.
Because that's what I've been speaking to leaders of on a significant level around the region today, and they are thinking along those lines, that now the world is congratulating Israel, thanking Israel, good job, you clobber Tehran, you didn't start World War III as some people were fearing. Okay, now you can have a little bit more of a free hand in Rafah.
Richard, Dom, thank you both for joining me and for your analysis and expertise. Now, as we said, that was Dominic Waghorn and Richard Engel. Do stay with us. We've got lots more coming up of our analysis in the next few minutes.
Push the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region.
I'm going to have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street.
Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake, there'll be finished? I don't know.
Welcome back. We're live in Jerusalem, where we are bringing you the latest news and reaction from our correspondents across the Middle East. Now, as we've been reporting, the overnight strikes in Iran will have done little to calm the tinderbox conditions throughout the Middle East. Attacks along Israel's border with Lebanon between Israeli forces and Hezbollah have increased in recent days, and tens of thousands of people have been displaced from their homes, fearing for their safety. Well, let's get more from our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, who reports from the Lebanese capital, Beirut.
The Iranian influence looms large in Lebanon, and Hezbollah is the strongest and most powerful of Iran's proxies. This fighter's funeral was a chance to show not just the Hezbollah strength in numbers, but the loyalty it can call on against the common enemies. And they start this devoted allegiance very young.
Those of us in Lebanon and everyone who is part of the axis of the resistance everywhere, we're not going to surrender, and no one can frighten us or any partner in this axis.
And that is the real risk, and the message from Hezbollah and Iran. Hit us and you hit us all. And the axis covers Yemen, Iraq and Syria, as well as Lebanon's powerful militia.
It's not really known how strong Hezbollah is in terms of numbers of fighters. Some say it could be as many as 150,000 fighters. Impossible to tell. All we can tell is that there are a lot of them, and they are growing stronger.
The bombing on the southern Lebanese-Israeli border has intensified over the past few days, and with it, tensions have soared over Israeli military intentions this side of the border. There are already tens of thousands living rough after being forced out of their homes to get out of the line of fire. They can't keep up with demand, and those in need keeps rising.
Now, for me, yes, it's war. It's war. In fact, it's war because daily we saw the bombed, we listen the voice of the airplanes. It's very, very hard situation.
The Hijazi family, including an elderly grandmother and 11 young children, are sleeping in a classroom now, uncertain about when or what they'll return to.
When the phosphorus bombs hit the ground, they produce some sort of yellow powder, and there's a disgusting smell. All our lands are like this. All the south is like this.
War is stressful, and in these conditions, it doesn't take much to spark a fight. They've suffered a lot here already, and right now the funerals of fighters are sometimes several times a day. But the Hezbollah hierarchy, as well as the rank and file, seem to be signaling they don't want an all-out war, but they're ready for one. Perhaps the only certainty is that the dangers of an escalation still very much remain, and nothing has removed that so far.
And Alex joins us now live from Beirut. And Alex, you've been speaking to a Hezbollah MP today.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get access to Hezbollah politicians or the military. They decided they'd put up this spokesman to represent the Hezbollah view, and that is significant. That means he's speaking on behalf of the hierarchy, the leadership, and probably reflecting the feeling within Iran. And first of all, I thought what was most interesting was that he poo-pooed the whole idea of an attack and very much downplayed it, said that this was all about Israel saving face and somehow retaining some sort of dignity, having been persuaded not to go all out by Israel's allies. But he did issue a warning that if it does escalate any further, if Israel does attack them again or even more, then they risked a whole bank of resistance from the so-called axis of resistance. Have a listen.
Many in the West, they were saying that Iran would respond with the allies of Iran in the region would go into a war. It has been proved that Iran said it publicly, we're going to retaliate. We are going to retaliate by Iranian hands from the Iranian soil. And this is what happened. This is one thing. But if things escalated into a larger scale, you have to understand, and everybody has to understand, that just like what the West is doing, all of these governments and armies and countries are supplying Israel, then the Axis will fight as an Axis.
And that involves multiple countries and multiple militia groups.
When we talk, we're talking about resistance. You call it militia. I mean, I'm not impose on you what to use, but we're talking about freedom
fighting
fighters.
Groups. Yeah, fighting groups.
Freedom fighters who believe it's their land, it's their dignity. We have the same enemy. We have the same threat. We have the same language. We have the same religion. We have the same values. We have every right to be together in fighting the same enemy who keep aggressing and occupying and slaughtering and making genocides in our region.
Alex, and quite interesting, he made that point that, you describe us as some kind of proxies. We see ourselves as allies. And really, to your point, and the point you have continued to make, that they view this as an attack on one is an attack on all.
Very much so, and I think he underlined that over and over again. It wasn't so much as a threat, but in reality, there is an implicit threat there. Don't push us too much, or we'll all be banging up against your doors. And they very much kept on reiterating, the Hezbollah spokesman, Ibrahim Musawi, that Israel has breached what he called, they've reached a high bar in breaching a whole range of international laws, and they've been backed up by the US, UK, France, and most of the international community. Now, they think that those flagrant breaches of international rule have left them morally bankrupt and unable to preach now to them, Hezbollah and the Iranian axis of resistance, about morals and dignity. He said there's only one way of stopping this, and that is somehow stopping the war, ceasefire, and recognizing Palestine as a state and stopping the bombardment of Gaza. And they seem very firm on that, Yalda.
Alex, thank you so much for all of your reporting there. You're watching our special program live from Jerusalem. Coming up in the next few minutes, we'll be getting more on Israel's take with diplomat Danny Alon very shortly. Welcome back. We're live in Jerusalem, where we're bringing you the latest news and reaction from our correspondents across the Middle East. Now, one of the aims of this morning's attack appears to have been to strike close to an Iranian nuclear site, but crucially, not to hit it directly. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, explains why the city of Isfahan has become the current focus of the ongoing tension in the Middle East.
A muted response by Israel and Iran to this apparent Israeli attack seems to indicate that neither side is seeking an escalation to all-out war for now. While the region is still on a knife edge, the crisis could have been much worse. This map gives a sense of the Iranian military bases and nuclear sites Israel may have considered hitting in retaliation to Iran's unprecedented missile and drone attack last weekend. Yet the response looks to have been limited, focused on the city of Isfahan, a centre of Iranian missile production, research and development. Local media reported explosions caused by Iranian air defences shooting down drones. At least some of the activity appears to have happened at an Air Force base in the city. This picture shows the entrance office windows in the area were reportedly shattered. Satellite imagery from a few years ago gives a sense of why this place might be of interest, with aircraft hangars as well as jets on the tarmac. Also in the area is a facility that's part of Iran's nuclear programme. This still from a video shows multiple air defence positions nearby. A local news reporter describes the site as Nuclear Energy Mountain, and the place is well guarded. With a distance of around 1,000 miles between Tel Aviv and Isfahan, drones are clearly one way Israel could have carried out the attack, and not necessarily from its own soil. In fact, an analyst on Iranian TV claimed drones had been launched by infiltrators inside Iran. Any attack by Israel would have been a way to test Iranian air defences and to send a message.
I think Israel is sending a very clear message to Iran that it can target very precisely deep inside Iran. And it's also sending a message at the same time that it is not keen to escalate. It's basically responding very precisely.
While recent fears have been about all-out conflict, Israel and Iran have long been locked in a shadow war of deniable attacks and counterattacks. An Israeli drone was suspected of a strike back in January last year, also in the central city of Isfahan. Western and regional leaders have spent the past few days urging restraint on both sides. And while a direct war could yet happen, there will surely be renewed hope that further confrontation between Iran and Israel will return to the shadows.
Deborah Haynes reporting there. Let's speak now to Israeli diplomat Danny Ayalon. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on the programme. We haven't had any sort of response or reaction from Israeli officials. Do you think that we ever will?
I'm not sure, Yalda. I don't think that if Israel was the apparent attacker, would like to really provoke more the situation and get things much worse. I think that the attack had basically two objectives. One is to show Iran that whoever attacked it is much more advanced technologically, operationally, and from intelligence point of view. You know, whoever attacked, let's assume it's Israel, used less than 1/10 of the amount of explosives and drones and missiles that Iran used a week ago on Israel. And yet the damage on Iran was 10 times more. So I think this is suffice to deter Iran, hopefully. The second message was not less important, and that is the proximity to the Iranian illegal nuclear program. And here is to show the entire international world that if Iran is so aggressive now, it could be 10 times more aggressive if it becomes nuclear. And then not just the Middle East, but the entire world will be at the mercy of this crazy, ideological, ruthless ayatollahs who are trying to destabilize the Middle East and beyond.
Danny, we saw Israel target a diplomatic compound in Damascus on April the 1st. Then Iran responded. Now Israel has responded. In your view, has the bill been settled?
I would think so. You know, it was a departure of the Iranian long-time strategy, where they cowardly, I must say, were hiding behind their proxies, whether it was Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, of course, the Hezbollah, the militia, the Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq, the Houthis and all that. They were willing to fight till the last Lebanese or the last Palestinian. I guess what happened in Syria, which, by the way, was not a consulate, and Israel did not take responsibility officially, so Iran had its leeway for deniability, but they opted to attack Israel. And this is why we saw, I guess, the response. I think it is quite logical for the Iranians to go back to the shadows, as Yalda, you say, and that is because they would like very much to concentrate on their very dangerous nuclear activities. And this is why it is so important for the entire international community to come down on Iran, to clamp down on Iran, maximum sanctions economically, certainly political pressure, and also clear threats that if Iran breaches the nuclear, let's say, IPT, which is, the non-proliferation, NPT, the non-proliferation treaty, which it is a signatory of. So they are breaching their own international obligations. If they do that, they risk a real retaliatory response militarily.
Well, Danny, just in the last 48 hours, we've heard from within Iran, a Revolutionary Guard commander who manages the nuclear security, has said we're going to review our nuclear doctrine. So, they haven't indicated exactly what that means. But the rhetoric certainly seems to be escalating. We've also today, my colleague Alex Crawford spoke to a Hezbollah MP, and he said, you may call us militia, you may call us proxies, but we are allies, and an attack on one is an attack on all. So their view, their perception of this is obviously completely different to Israel's, the United States and the Western allies.
Well, 2 points, Yalda. The fact that the Iranians brazenly threaten to actually continue their illegal program, I mean, this is outrageous and unprecedented, that a country, a member of the UN, is flaunting, continuing breaching all norms and conduct of international relations and international law by threatening them to continue an illegal nuclear program. As to the solidarity, I must say that I would say that what Iran has done is basically take over Lebanon, for instance. The Sunnis and the Christians in Lebanon have nothing to do with the Shiites of Iran, quite contrary. And what Iran has done is actually subjugated the entire population of Lebanon to a very extreme, dangerous terror organizations, the Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran. So there's no solidarity here. Hezbollah is an organ of the Iranian Revolution Guard, and they would like to continue and support Iran in their nefarious ambition to control the Middle East and beyond. This is what the Hezbollah is.
Danny, Eylon, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
Now, the Jewish Shabbat has just begun here this evening, and the week-long Passover festival starts on Monday. So just how are Israelis feeling in the midst of the growing tensions and violence across the region? Well, our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, has been monitoring the situation for us from Tel Aviv. And Alex, on the program this evening, it's been quite extraordinary, actually, where we saw strikes last weekend, we saw strikes today, and yet we're talking about a situation that may have, for now, de-escalated. How are people feeling about sort of the movement and the tensions, the jeopardy that we've heard and seen in the last week?
Well, I think in terms of the temperature, people I spoke to in the lead up to the Iranian attack, they were very, very nervous before that happened. They didn't know what manner it would take. They worried about this escalating into a much broader war. Now, of course, the Israeli Defense Forces and the allies managed to intercept most of the missiles. And I think there was a feeling of relief, really, that the military here, one woman said to me, had kind of saved the nation. That was the feeling, one of relief. And lots of people then were focusing on what would be the Israeli response. Again, most people I spoke to thought there would be some kind of retaliation from Israel, and that is because Israeli security policy for decades has been underpinned by this idea that to form a deterrent, you often have to go on the offensive. And now we have had that action. And I think, again, looking at the limited response, most people take away from that may be the end of this cycle of the direct confrontation. But I think it also depends on where you live in Israel. If you're on the northern border, people I've been speaking to up there over the last couple of days, they're really frustrated. They're living in guest houses, they're living in hotels around the country in safer parts of Israel. They don't know when they'll be able to return to their homes. I spoke to another woman here who was from Eilat, which is in the south of Israel. That that city's been targeted by Houthis with Houthi missiles. So again, frustration then. And then, of course, there's the people in the southern border living around Gaza. They also don't know when the war will end there. And then I suppose the bigger question for many Israelis is what happens with the hostages. When it comes to the Gaza war, there is great support for it, but there's division about how it should be conducted. There are people who think it should be prosecuted until Hamas is absolutely eliminated. But then there's a sizable number of people in this country, and you see the protests on the streets of Tel Aviv on Saturdays, who actually believe the hostage issue should be put first, and those people should be brought back home. But overall, I think there is a general sense of relief across Israel that this just may be the end of this cycle of escalation.
Alex, thank you so much for all of your reporting. You're watching our special program live on Sky News. We've got much more, so do stay with us.
I've been a pageant judge for the last 10 years, and what I've learned is that modern day pageants are not about perfection. It's about diversity, it's about celebrating the whole woman. And what I'm looking for in this pageant is not perfection. This isn't a boobs and bum and 70s pin-up pageant. We're looking for as real a person as we can possibly get to be a role model for the AI industry and to change that perception of AI women.
I think it's horrific. I don't understand why you are condoning and celebrating these artificial, unachievable standards of beauty.
Well, that's exactly what I'm not looking for. And I think because of the other two judges that they brought onto the panel, we are looking for more realism. I'm certainly looking for more realism. In the pageant industry now, it's all about diversity. You don't have to have the perfect figure. It's about the message that they give out, the social message, the platform, and being realistic. It's an AI pageant, so be as realistic as possible. That's certainly what I'm looking for.
Welcome back to our special program. We're live in Jerusalem, where we're bringing you the latest news and reaction from across the Middle East. Well, let's go live now to Tehran and speak to political analyst Sader Zibakalam. Thank you very much, Mr. Zibakalam, for joining us here on the program. Just give us a sense of how Iranians today were reacting to the events of this morning. We woke up here in Jerusalem to learn that Israel had attacked Iran.
Well, obviously, many Iranians were baffled, and they sort of couldn't believe that the attack had taken place because apart from some people in Isfahan who heard a loud explosion, no one else has heard anything. In my opinion, it appears that both sides are trying, and the Israelis are hoping that because the operation was very limited, maybe they are hoping that Iranian would not feel that they have to retaliate. In fact, some Iranians have already said that we are not going to retaliate. So unless something extraordinary does happen, we could say that the first round of confrontation between Tehran and Tel Aviv has ended.
In the past week, since Iran's attack on Israel, have the Iranian people felt tense and concerned about what may have come their way?
Obviously, they were nervous as to the dimension of the confrontation, and many Iranians were asking themselves that does that mean that there would be a war between Iran and Israel? And many people were anxious. Of course, you must realize that the people who are very much against the Islamic regime, they are still hoping that as a result of confrontation between Iran and Israel, which would inevitably draw the United States as well in the war, the Islamic regime might weaken and it might fail actually. But of course, there are the supporters of the Islamic regime, though they are in a minority, but they strongly believe in the Islamic regime. Of course, as I said, they are in minority, but they are very much supportive of the Islamic regime.
Mr. Ziba Kalam, we've seen demonstrations in Iran. We've seen many Iranians frustrated with the policies of the regime, namely the women who have been protesting against the hijab and asking for more rights. We've seen young Iranians executed and imprisoned. The prisons, Evin prison, is full of intellectuals, all sorts of people, journalists and writers and activists. Do you think that in any way the regime has weakened as a result of these demonstrations, but also the events of the last few weeks?
No, Yalda, the point is that there are at least about 20% of Iranians who still support the Islamic regime. Now, 20% of 85 million population, we are talking about 17 million Iranians who still strongly support the Islamic regime. You might say that what about the 80% or 70% who do not support the Islamic regime? Of course, they are against the Islamic regime. They are against the enforcement of hijab and many other policies of the Islamic regime. But what I'm trying to say is that the Islamic regime is not in a very serious situation.
Okay, looks like we've lost Mr. Sadegh Ziba Kalam there, but he is a political analyst who was speaking to us live from Tehran. Well, all week we've been monitoring the developments. We saw last weekend Iran launch that brazen attack on Israel with 300 drones, cruise and ballistic missiles launched on this country. Today, we saw Israel respond. It's been an extraordinary 12 hours. We are following all of the developments, but this is Sky News, and coming up at 6, we will continue to follow the unfolding situation in the Middle East.